What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content they watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the latest episode of Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions, featuring special guest Becky Lynch, the current Raw Women's Champion. This went up the other day on Royal Rumble Friday. I mean, it was Saturday, but Royal Rumble Weekend Friday, that is, January 28, 2022. Another great episode. This went around 90 minutes, just short of like the hour and a half mark. It was around an hour and 26 minutes. Steve Austin never misses with these episodes of Broken Skull Sessions. And for all the network and Peacock content we haven't gotten in the last year, we really haven't gotten a lot of 24s lately. The day ofs are almost essentially gone. We haven't gotten those in ages. Stuff like that. We can at least count on the monthly episodes of Broken Skull Sessions to get us through. We had Bobby Lashley and Rollins late last year, Diamond Dallas Page back in December, and this month we got Becky Lynch, and she was really, really good. So to start off the episode, she talks about how she's having more fun now than ever before, largely due to having more freedom as a heel, and also in becoming a big star, you get more freedom on the mic and with your matches, storylines, stuff like that. They'll get into that a little bit more as we go deeper into her current run and stuff like that. As far as what has been different lately compared to a few years ago, her priorities changed as soon as she became a mother back in late 2021, with Seth Rollins being the father, of course, her husband. And she mentions that motherhood has been better than she ever thought it would be, and how it kind of scared her originally. She talks about that, the fears that she had going into it. Would I bond with my daughter, with my child, whatever? Would I be a good mother? Am I cut out for this sort of thing? But being a mom, she admits, has kind of been natural for her. It's come naturally for her, which is great. She admits she doesn't sleep through the night. She has to, rely on a lot of coffee, and she can't really sleep on the planes and on the flights and stuff like that, because if her baby's up, then she's up. But, she brings her daughter on the road with her, which is very commendable. And she says that her daughter does well on the road. I think her name is Rue, right? Rue does well on the road, but it's still a challenge nonetheless. So kind of going back to the wrestling stuff, Stone Cold praises the Day 1 match that she had with Liv Morgan just earlier this month on New Year's Day. So that tells you they filmed this probably soon after that, either the week after or a week later or whatever. So it is relatively recent. It wasn't like it was filmed many, many months ago. But she talks about how, he mentions that he feels that match helped elevated Liv Morgan. And she wasn't going to win the championship. I know she didn't win the Rumble last night. She didn't look great in the match. I mean, she was in there for a little bit. Didn't win, but still, I thought she had a pretty good showing. But still, I would agree. I would say that match helped take Liv to another level that she wasn't at previously. I would totally agree with that. She talks coming up in the business from there and how her storytelling has kind of taken priority over everything else. And, mat work and being a technician and stuff like that is great, but storytelling comes first and foremost in her mind and why certain things are happening. She's always trying to take ideas that are given to her by creative, by Vince, people like that, and trying to make them better, if not pitch ideas of her own. So we go all the way back to when she first started in wrestling, specifically when she started at the age of 15 in 2002. And I'm sure they covered this in her 24 a couple of years ago. I'm sure I already talked about this in her 24 a couple of years ago after she won the championships at WrestleMania 35. But it's worth revisiting. She has a really cool upbringing in wrestling and whatnot. She talks about how at that time when she got into wrestling, she was drinking a lot. And she admits that she was headed down a bad path. And it was only after kind of going to the gym and finding the rare gyms that there are in Ireland, according to her, that she got in shape, really started to motivate herself, and wanted to enter the business. She went to Finn Balor, or as she calls him, Fergal. I believe that's his real name. I'm going to call him Balor for sake of clarity here, but Fergal, as she calls him. She went to his wrestling school, and she was inspired greatly by Team Extreme, the Hardy Boys, and wanted to wrestle like them and then dress like Lita. And it's weird, they actually never did Lita and Lynch. They never actually teased that possibility, ever had them interact on TV. And they're so similar, you think that they would, but they just never have, which is odd. Anyway, so he talks about his first payoff, earning $10, $15 from his first match, Steve did. For Becky, she says she felt like a millionaire when she earned €50 from her first trip to Europe upon starting wrestling. But she admits she was awful at the time. She was not very good at all. And she is her own worst critic. I'm sure she wasn't terrible, but in her mind, she was not good at all. Thankfully, her brother was also wrestling at that point, so he also kind of helped her get better, which is cool. But he was consuming everything wrestling. So she got injured during a match in Germany. I guess she got concussed either in that same match or that was the injury because she was doing a suplex and the opponent, who wasn't very good, probably worse than she was at that point, landed on her head. So she was kind of fucked. She entered bodybuilding. That didn't exactly work out for her in that, during which she developed an eating disorder. So that wasn't good. And she just got to Orlando, and that was at that point she realized she couldn't do this anymore. She felt depressed and lost in wrestling, and she stepped away at that point for 7 years, doing a lot of odd jobs, including being a flight attendant and doing stuff like that. And from there, she went to college for acting. And there's a lot of things I'm missing here. And again, a lot of this is already well documented, well established. But she had called her mom up at one point before she quit and was like, I got to come home. Do you mind if I live with you? Like, I got to quit this wrestling thing. And the mom said, no, like, you got to see it through. You started it. You got to finish it. And I think she kind of used the concussion, depression type stuff as an excuse, I think, as far as why she couldn't continue on with it. So from there, again, she did a lot of odd jobs, went to college, finished her degree, which is great. But during this entire time, she had a voice in the back of her head telling her, you got a lot of untapped potential. You can do this. You got to at least see what you can accomplish out of this by chasing this dream. So she had that voice in the back of her head telling her to go back to wrestling. She talked to Fergal, a.k.a. Finn Balor, about it. He also urged her to give it another shot. And she did. She wound up from that getting a tryout at WWE, nailed it, got hired, I think, in 2013. And upon arriving in NXT, she put too much pressure on herself. Paige, who she was already friendly with from the independent scene, had told everyone upon her arrival that Becky was this great wrestler. And Lynch is like, no, don't tell them that. Because they're either going to think that I think that I'm great or that I'm better than I actually am, which she admits that she wasn't. So she actually knew nothing about makeup. She said she had to go out and buy her own dress, which she didn't own. She was way too poor at that time to buy proper gear. She was too scared to really try anything new with the head trainer at that point, and even today, I believe, Sarah Amato, which was cool that they mentioned her. But she was always friendly with the other four horsewomen, Bayley, Sasha, and Charlotte, from the get-go. There were other people, she says, without naming names, that weren't too friendly in response to her, but at least Charlotte, Bayley, and Sasha were always very friendly with her, which is cool. She told Bill DeMott, who was in charge of NXT at that point in the development side of things, the head trainer at the Performance Center, she told him, listen, I know I'm not good, but I know I have a connection with that crowd. So just give me a shot. I know I can do this and continue to work on that connection with the crowd and just get better. And she was always able to bring that energy no matter what. That was really her strong suit. And she still does to this day, obviously. But, Steve asks her about the four horsewomen if she felt like the afterthought, and she did. And rightfully so. I mean, we go back to 2015. Yeah, she was called up with Sasha and Charlotte in the same segment at the same time. But if you look back at that Diva Revolution, the early days of that stuff and the faction wars they were doing, Becky Lynch was clearly the odd woman out. I mean, Sasha and Charlotte were already doing revolutionary things in NXT. They were former NXT Women's Champions. Becky was not. She got a lot of buzz coming out of that TakeOver Unstoppable match in May of 2015. But beyond that, they kind of called her up a little too soon. Bayley was doing her thing in NXT, which was great. She should have stayed in NXT. I think she was hurt anyway. With Becky, though, the booking wasn't there. They really did do poorly by her for a very long time, for at least for another year. In Road to WrestleMania, she ended up doing well, but in the latter half of 2015, her call-up was completely botched. She was doing a whole lot of nothing and really kind of fell in the shadow of Charlotte Flair. That being said, she was focused on what she was good at, and that was telling a story. And she can connect with the crowd by being genuine. So they fast forward to WrestleMania 32, her, Sasha, and Charlotte triple threat match for the first ever WWE Women's Championship. Obviously not counting the original Women's Championship from years earlier. But they had that match to crown the new Women's Champion. She talked about how that match was actually never supposed to happen. I think it was a multi-woman match they were building up on Raw with Summer Rae or whatever. And then a lot of women got hurt or couldn't compete or whatever, and plans changed. So it turned to Charlotte versus Lynch on Raw, and they got a lot of time out of their match, so they actually revisited it for the Rumble. The story went over so well that kept Becky in the spotlight for Mania, and that's why it was a triple threat and not Charlotte versus Sasha one-on-one. And they had a great match. That was my favorite match by far from that show. That show was fucking terrible. I was not a WrestleMania 32 fan at all. And even after that match, she had a great performance, but she fell by the wayside again. Before Backlash 2016, they rewatch it here when she became the first ever, the inaugural SmackDown Women's Champion. Again, I don't remember her doing really much of anything in the months following WrestleMania 32. I know she feuded with Dana Brooke and Emma for a little while. Emma got hurt. Dana Brooke, I don't really think that feud went anywhere. So she really didn't do anything until the brand split thankfully salvaged her career, and she was able to become the main woman, the main focus for the female side of things on SmackDown in the second half of 2016. She talks about how much that title win meant to her, And even then, though, she didn't feel like she was the focus. She was supposed to be as the SmackDown Women's Champion, but even going into Survivor Series, she wasn't the real, she was the captain of Team SmackDown, but not really. I think Nikki Bella was, and she wasn't the champion. If I remember, was Becky like the first one eliminated from that match? It was either that year or the next year. Becky was eliminated like insanely quickly. It might have been that year, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, why would you do that? So anyway, they kind of go forward from there to SummerSlam 2018 when Becky Lynch had lost in a SmackDown Women's Championship match with Charlotte Flair and Carmella. And even before that, I forgot to mention this, a big point of this episode. John Cena even came up to her one night and asked her who she was. He genuinely did not know who Becky Lynch was. And like her moniker was like the Irish Lass Kicker shit, but like what does that even mean? Like WWE gives a lot of people nicknames. She didn't know who she was at that point. She didn't really know her true self. She does now. She didn't at that point. So anyway, back to SummerSlam 2018. She loses. It was supposed to be Becky and Carmella one-on-one. Becky had been racking up wins all summer. People were really excited to see her win that championship from Carmella at the pay-per-view. And then here comes Charlotte Flair. She gets inserted at the last minute. She ends up winning the match, actually pinning Becky. And in storyline, Becky snaps, attacks her afterward. Great angle because the crowd in Brooklyn went fucking nuts. And, she knew, and they also show the post-SummerSlam promo from that SmackDown, which Alexis and I were actually at, which was fun show, great promo, love rewatching that promo. They rewatch it in its entirety here because it's such a good promo. WWE, you don't really need Becky to tell you this, but they thought Flair would be the face in that feud, and she obviously wasn't. Becky even says here she knew healing on the fans wasn't going to work, and she was in the zone during that Charlotte feud. They had a lot of good matches. They had good matches at Hell in the Cell. They had a good match. I don't think they had a match in Saudi. It was there, maybe Night of Champions, Clash of Champions, whatever it was, one of those September, October pay-per-views. And they had another match, maybe it was, I don't know, Super Showdown maybe? Oh, that's what it was. They weren't in Saudi yet, but they were in Australia, and they had another match there. That was decent. They ended up having the match at Evolution, obviously, the last woman standing match, the first one, I think, in main roster history for the women, and that was a fantastic match. But she talks about how speaking from the heart was really when it started to click for her. And also at that same time, she really started to hone in on her promo game during like the WWE.com interviews. And I was so glad that Stone Cold brought up, I think it was like the quinoa or whatever the fuck it's called. It was like this little thing that Becky was doing in the WWE.com backstage interviews back in 2016. It was really funny. And it was quinoa or something along those lines. And I knew that's what she was referencing when she was talking about the .com interviews. I didn't know that Stone Cold had seen those videos and knew what she was talking about, but clearly he took notes because he brought it up here. So this is a man that does his research, which I appreciate. But she mentions that she's always thinking about promos, and she's constantly writing down lines from her head on her phone, and she kind of change what she wants from the promos written for her. All the promos are written for people, but she can hopefully sometimes kind of change what she wants. Can't change everything, she says. If they want her to say a certain line, they'll have her say it whether she thinks it's a good line or not. Got to do what you're told. But yeah, she can kind of have a bit more influence on her promos than other people, which is good. They then rewatch her getting her face bloodied by Nia Jax on Raw, the Raw before Survivor Series 2018, when she was supposed to face Ronda Rousey at the pay-per-view. That changed the complexion and the entire landscape of WWE and even her career from that point forward. It was hard for her character at that point to kind of show vulnerability. But she did, and that got her even more over with the audience, that whole visual of the blood on her face and whatever. She talks about the origin of the man character, which she started up at that point, and how it came from a text message from a friend, and how she started using the name from that point. Doesn't mention Ric Flair, which, why give him the needless publicity? It's not. I know he used the man moniker, but that wasn't his actual nickname, which is fucking stupid that he would claim that. But anyway, John Cena actually came up to her a little bit later on around that point, I think, and told her, you figured out who you were. You figured out who you are, which is awesome that he would go up to her and say that. She talks about the Rousey feud and how they were polar opposites, and that's what made for such a good story. The dynamic was great. But she didn't know for sure until they got closer that they were going to be the main event of WrestleMania 35. And because she wasn't sure, she wanted to make sure that it would be, or at least she would be the main event of WrestleMania 35 by having the best story, not just getting the main event just because they were women. They rewatched the WrestleMania 35 Triple Threat, her victory where she became both the Raw and SmackDown Women's Champion. And it was actually another friend of hers, I don't know if it was the same friend that came up with the man, but another friend came up with Becky Two Belts. And she puts over the fact that it was a long show. They don't really talk about the finish too much. It looked like a botched finish. It wasn't great. But yeah, it was a really long show. As someone who was there and it was a great moment, It was definitely, it could have been a better match had it happened earlier in the show and had the show not been 7 hours long or whatever the fuck it was. But her brother was there, her dad was there, which is cool, in the front row. And it was at that point where she started to question what was next. Where do you go after reaching the apex of your career? And it's hard trying to stay on top of the mountain, especially tough to stay champion for over a year as a babyface. She praises TJ Wilson, a.k.a. Tyson Kidd, as a great asset to the business, by the way. But yeah, it was hard for her to walk away when she announced her pregnancy in May, I think it was, May of 2020. But it was made easier by no audience. If there was any period to kind of go away and have a kid, it would be then, with no audience around. So she mentioned how the pregnancy just kind of happened sooner than expected. She was hoping it would happen eventually, it just happened a little bit sooner than she thought. But the plan was almost always to come back. There was an inkling of doubt in her mind. What if things change? Anything can change. You can become happy and just may love being a mother so much you may never want to go back. But that wasn't the case, obviously. She came back. Loves being a mother, but she figured out that she can kind of balance being both, which is cool. She did think that she would be back by WrestleMania 37. I think she had her kid in December, so that would be a real quick turnaround time. I mean, for her to be in the Rumble and win the whole fucking thing a month after having her kid would have been ridiculous. I mean, she could have been physically ready by Mania. Would she have wrestled before then? Would she have been on TV? I don't know. So I think they made the right call by holding off until I mean, there were fans at Mania, but I think her real return, I mean, I guess she could have returned to Mania, but I'm glad she came back at SummerSlam, because by that point we were having Raws and SmackDowns with fans, whereas today we wouldn't have that. I mean, if it was a year ago, rather, we wouldn't have had that. She may have had the big pop in Mania, but no follow-up on Raw because there were no fans at that point, so it probably worked out for the better. But she did keep up with the product in her time off, she mentions, and she got off social media pretty much entirely to stay out of people's minds. But, in doing that, she wanted that bigger pop when she came back, which she did. A lot of people forgot about Becky in the right way, and it's like, oh shit, Becky's back, kind of wondering what she's been up to since she's been off. But yeah, they show workout photos of her getting back into shape after being pregnant, and she looks fantastic today. And that time off helped preserve her character, she feels. And she talks about cutting promos with no crowd and how hard it was before she left in early 2020. And how she and Seth always talk about wrestling, even in their off time, away from wrestling. They're still talking about wrestling and how they can improve their storylines and matches and themselves and stuff like that. They rewatched the SummerSlam 2021 return where she beat Bianca Belair in a matter of seconds to win the SmackDown Women's Championship. I guess she said it wouldn't have had the same impact if they had a competitive match and Belair lost that way. I guess, but like the boos that people had that night, it wasn't like they were booing Becky. I was there when she came back. They weren't really booing Becky. More people were confused than anything. It's like, do we cheer Becky? Do we cheer Bianca? Do we cheer the fact that she fucking lost? And it just made Bianca look incredibly inferior. And if they're not going to blow that off in Mania this year, then it just makes her look like an even bigger loser. You know what I mean? So I know what she's saying and why it worked to put heat on her. People are still cheering her now, by the way. But it's like, surely there was another way of accomplishing that, or at least making it more obvious that she was turning heel. She did not really make it all that obvious at all that she was a heel at that point. So it was I could see why she's defending it, but it wasn't exactly perfectly executed, at least in my opinion. But it did feel great being back, she says. It was a lot easier to get people to hate you if you're, constantly switching it up and not staying the same stagnant babyface. And she had to switch it up by ditching everything that people liked about her, including the man and the entrance and everything else. They rewatched, or before I get to that, she mentions how it's more fun being a heel, again, more freedom. And as far as the SummerSlam match goes, the way that it worked out, and she was happy that it was so short because that whole return, she didn't know what she was doing that day until she got there, she says. And they didn't really have much time to put together a match because she and Bianca never worked together before. She hadn't wrestled a formal match in over a year and a half. So she was fine, kind of taking her time, getting back in the ring and not having a full-length match immediately. So maybe it was for the best in retrospect. I still don't think so, but I get where she's coming from, though. So anyway, they do rewatch the title swap from back in October on SmackDown and how she goes over the original plan, how Becky, I think, was supposed to hold both belts originally before she would give her the Raw Women's title. Charlotte would challenge her to a title versus title match, winner take all. Becky would say no and then walk away. I think that was the original plan. But there was a lot of heat afterward because it didn't go as planned. Charlotte kind of went into business for herself. I'm sure Charlotte has a different side of the story, but she went into business for herself. She dropped the fucking title. Becky threw her title at Charlotte. They were clearly had some animosity there. And she knew in advance, like, that was what was supposed to happen. But Becky was pissed because she's like, I know Charlotte's not going to do that. I know Charlotte. I know she's not going to do what you guys want her to do. She's going to go into business for herself. And she was even more mad because she was right, and that's exactly what happened. So I guess they went at it backstage verbally, and Becky was fucking pissed at her, I guess, and whatever, and they sent Charlotte home. So that was the report. That's what she said. She kind of confirms it here. And anyway, so they capitalized off that real emotion at Survivor Series when they did have that champion versus champion match. And she got real emotional beforehand backstage, seeing the video package, portraying them as best friends, which they were. At this point, and at that point, they weren't. They aren't anymore. So she got real emotional thinking about that too. And she even says here what she told me in her interview a couple of months ago. She feels she can be friends potentially with Becky or with Charlotte again when they're both out of the business. And, she has nothing but love for all the other 4 horsewomen, Bayley, Sasha Banks, Charlotte. And at this current point in time, she wants to continue changing the game. And she feels that she's having the best matches of her career right now. She feels great physically. And she won't be done anytime soon. She will hopefully hang it up after someone taps her on the shoulder, or hopefully she taps herself on the shoulder and realizes that it's time to hang up, close that chapter, and not go past her expiration date. She does say that she has believed and both doubted herself over the course of her career. And the only person in her career up to this point that's ever really criticized her is herself. That's the only real person in her head. And thankfully, she doesn't air that stuff because nobody can tell her if she's feeling great. Nobody can tell her otherwise. And no one can tell her that she's not great. You know what I mean? So I thought that was a cool little line to end on. But a great episode here of Broken Skull Sessions with Steve Austin and Becky Lynch. Becky is just... Again, like I said, I talked to her for an interview back in November, right before Survivor Series, and she's fantastic. Just one of the coolest, genuine people on the roster, I would say, right now. And that definitely came across in this interview, the quickest 90 minutes you'll ever watch, aside from the other interviews, which are equally entertaining. So definitely make time to check this out on Peacock and on the network elsewhere. Broken Skull Sessions with Becky Lynch. Always look forward to Broken Skull Sessions, always entertaining, always a treat. This one was no exception. I look forward to the next one as well, regardless of who the guest might be. So until then, guys, be sure to like this video. Be sure to drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily videos. Appreciate you guys checking on this review. Have a great one. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.